The crystal chandelier above our table cast dancing shadows across my mother's disappointed face as she gestured toward my brother Derek with obvious pride. I sat there in the leather chair of Morrison's steakhouse, watching her beam at her golden child, while completely ignoring my presence. Derek pulled out his phone, swiping through photos of his luxury penthouse with the kind of smugness that made my stomach turn. My girlfriend, Jessica, squeezed my hand under the white tablecloth, sensing the storm brewing. What my family didn't know was that every marble countertop, every floor-to-ceiling window, every premium fixture they were admiring actually belonged to me. Derek had been my tenant for 3 years. The dinner had started innocently enough when I walked through Morrison's mahogany doors at 7 sharp, spotting our reserved table in the center of the main dining room. The restaurant buzzed with conversations from successful business people and well-dressed families, creating the perfect backdrop for what my mother Patricia had called a celebration of Derek's promotion to senior vice president. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd chosen the most expensive steakhouse in downtown Chicago to showcase her favorite son's achievements. Derek was already holding court when I arrived, his perfectly pressed navy suit and gleaming watch catching the warm light from the table lamps. His wife Samantha sat beside him in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her auburn hair styled in an elaborate updo that screamed high maintenance. My father Robert nodded approvingly at whatever Derek was saying, his gray mustache twitching with pride as he sipped his whiskey neat. "Wallace, you're late," my mother announced without looking up from her menu, her silver hair pulled back in the same severe bun she'd worn for the past 15 years. She wore her favorite black pearls and a burgundy dress that complemented her pale complexion, but her tone carried that familiar chill reserved specifically for me. "Traffic was brutal on Lakeshore Drive," I replied, pulling out Jessica's chair before taking my own seat. Jessica looked stunning in her emerald green dress, her blonde hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She'd been nervous about this dinner all week, knowing how my family treated me during these gatherings. "Well, Derek was just showing us photos of his penthouse," Patricia continued, finally gracing me with a glance. 32nd floor panoramic views of Lake Michigan, 2,000 square feet of pure luxury. He closed on it last month. Derek's chest puffed out as he turned his phone toward me, scrolling through image after image of the pristine living space. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths marble, everything smart home technology throughout. He rattled off like a real estate agent. The monthly mortgage is more than some people make in a year, but when you're successful, you can afford the finer things. My jaw tightened as I recognized every detail. The imported Italian marble I'd personally selected, the custom lighting fixtures I'd had installed, the view of the lake that had convinced me to purchase the property as an investment 3 years ago. Derek had called me in tears back then, begging for help after his gambling debts had destroyed his credit and left him facing eviction from his previous apartment. "It's beautiful," Jessica said diplomatically, though I caught her glancing at me with concern. She knew about my property investment business, though she didn't know the full extent of what I owned or that Derek was renting from me. "Beautiful doesn't even begin to cover it," Samantha chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension as she looked pointedly at me. "Some people know how to build real wealth, while others just drift through life without any ambition." The server approached our table, a professional woman in her 30s who introduced herself as Karen. "Good evening, everyone. Can I start you with some appetizers or drinks?" "We'll have a bottle of Dom Perignon," Patricia announced grandly. "We're celebrating my son's success." She gestured toward Derek while completely ignoring my presence. "He just purchased a magnificent penthouse downtown." Derek beamed as he continued scrolling through photos. "Here's the master suite," he said, showing off the king-sized bed and walk-in closet that I remembered helping design. "And this is the kitchen where Samantha loves to cook." The lie almost made me laugh out loud, since I knew Samantha couldn't boil water without burning it. Wallace, dear, how's that little apartment of yours? Patricia asked with fake sweetness, her blue eyes cold as winter ice. Still living in that cramped studio in Lincoln Park? It's a one-bedroom, I corrected quietly, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. The truth was I owned a beautiful 3-bedroom condo in Gold Coast that I'd purchased with cash 2 years ago, but I'd never mentioned it to my family. I'd learned long ago that sharing my successes only led to requests for money or worse, accusations that I was lying. Oh, one whole bedroom. Derek laughed, the sound echoing off the restaurant's vaulted ceiling. How luxurious. I bet it's 700 square feet, maybe 800 if you count the closets? Derek, Jessica said firmly, her green eyes flashing with anger. There's no need to be cruel. Cruel. Patricia scoffed, adjusting her pearl necklace with manicured fingers. We're just acknowledging reality. Derek has built an empire while Wallace plays around with his little graphic design hobby. The word hobby hit me like a physical blow. My freelance graphic design work was just a front, something I did to explain my income without revealing my real business. In reality, I owned 12 properties across Chicago, generating enough rental income to live comfortably while building substantial wealth for the future. But I'd kept this secret from my family for good reason. At least Derek understands what it means to be a man. Robert finally spoke, his deep voice carrying disappointment that I'd heard my entire life. Property ownership, financial responsibility, building something lasting. These are the things that matter. I thought about the property management company I'd built from nothing, starting with a small inheritance from my grandmother that I'd invested wisely while Derek was blowing his money on poker games and expensive trips. I thought about the phone calls from tenants who praised my fairness and responsiveness. I thought about the financial security I'd built without anyone's help or approval. Derek's always been the responsible one. Patricia continued, warming to her favorite topic. Even as children, he showed leadership qualities while Wallace was always lost in his imagination. Karen returned with the champagne, pouring it carefully into crystal flutes while pretending not to notice the tension at our table. Other diners glanced over occasionally, probably wondering about the family dynamics playing out in front of them. A toast, Patricia announced, raising her glass toward Derek. To my successful son who proves that hard work and intelligence pay off. Derek raised his glass with a satisfied smirk, while Samantha practically glowed with reflected pride. Robert nodded approvingly as he lifted his champagne. Jessica hesitated, looking uncomfortable with the obvious slight toward me, but eventually raised her glass to avoid causing a scene. I sat there with my untouched champagne, watching my family celebrate my brother's ownership of property that belonged to me. The irony was so thick I could taste it, but the pain of being dismissed and humiliated in front of Jessica and strangers was very real. Drink up, Wallace, Derek said with mock concern. Maybe if you stopped spending money on expensive dinners you can't afford, you could save up for a down payment on something decent. That's when something inside me snapped. The time for silence was over. I set down my champagne flute with deliberate precision, the crystal making a sharp ping against the white tablecloth that seemed to cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. Every face at the table turned toward me as I pulled out my phone, fingers moving across the screen with purpose. Derek, I said calmly, my voice carrying a new authority that made my brother's smug expression falter slightly. I'm curious about something. When exactly did you purchase that penthouse? Last month, he replied quickly, though his eyes darted away from mine. Closed on the 15th. Why? I opened my banking app and navigated to the property management section where all my rental properties were listed with their monthly income statements. The penthouse Derek was claiming to own appeared at the top of the list, showing his monthly rent payment of $4,500 along with a growing balance of unpaid fees. That's interesting. I continued, turning my phone screen toward the table. Because according to my records, you've been renting that penthouse from me for 3 years and 2 months. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's champagne flute froze halfway to her lips, her face draining of color as she stared at my phone screen. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, while Samantha's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the confusion spreading across her features. "That's impossible," Patricia whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Wallace, if this is some kind of joke—" "No joke, Mom." I scrolled through the property ownership documents I kept digitally stored for all my investments. I purchased the penthouse at 1 Museum Park West in September 2021 for $1.8 million. Cash purchase, no mortgage. Derek called me in October of that year, desperate for a place to live after his landlord evicted him. Jessica's eyes widened as she saw the documents on my screen. She'd known I was successful, but she'd never seen the actual scope of my property portfolio. Her hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently in support and amazement. "You're lying," Derek said, but his voice cracked with panic. "Wallace, what kind of sick game is this? Everyone knows you barely make ends meet with your design work." I opened another app, this one connected to the building's management system. "Would you like me to show them the lease agreement, Derek? The one where you begged me to rent to you at below market rate because your credit score was destroyed and no other landlord would touch you." Robert leaned forward, his weathered face creased with confusion. "Wallace, son, what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that Derek doesn't own anything," I replied, my voice growing stronger with each word. "He's been my tenant for over 3 years, and frankly not a very good one. He's currently 6 months behind on rent, which totals $27,000. The revelation hit the table like a bomb. Patricia's hand flew to her throat, clutching her pearls as if they could anchor her to reality. Samantha turned to stare at Derek with growing horror, finally understanding why their finances never seemed to add up, despite his supposed success. "Show them the rental agreement," Derek challenged desperately, his face flushed red with embarrassment and rage. "If you're telling the truth, prove it." I opened my cloud storage and pulled up the signed lease document complete with Derek's signature and the emergency contact information he'd provided. The monthly rent amount, security deposit, and lease terms were all clearly visible on the official paperwork. "This is insane," Samantha breathed, snatching the phone from my hands to examine the documents more closely. "Derek, what is this? You told me you bought that place. You showed me mortgage papers." "They were preliminary documents," Derek stammered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the restaurant's comfortable temperature. "The closing got delayed, and then you decided to let everyone believe you owned property that actually belongs to your younger brother." I finished for him. "The brother you've been calling a failure for the past 3 years. Other diners had begun to notice our heated conversation, and Karen the server hovered nearby, clearly unsure whether to intervene or give us privacy. The elegant atmosphere of Morrison's Steakhouse made our family drama feel even more surreal. "Wallace," Patricia said slowly, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Are you telling us that you own 12 properties across Chicago?" I nodded, opening another screen that showed my full property portfolio. Apartment buildings in Logan Square and Wicker Park, condos in River North and Gold Coast, a few single-family homes in Lincoln Park and Lakeview. Total value around $14 million, generating approximately $48,000 per month in rental income. Jessica gasped audibly, finally understanding why I'd been so relaxed about money despite claiming to live on freelance graphic design work. The pieces were falling into place for everyone except my parents, who still seemed unable to process this reversal of everything they'd believed about their sons. "But how?" Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you accumulate that kind of wealth?" "Remember Grandma Helen's inheritance?" I asked, referring to my father's mother, who had passed away 5 years earlier. "She left Derek and me each $50,000. Derek spent his on a car and a trip to Las Vegas. I used mine as a down payment on my first rental property and reinvested the income." The truth was more complex than that. I'd also worked 80-hour weeks for 2 years, living in a studio apartment and eating ramen noodles while building my business. I'd studied real estate markets, learned property management, and made countless sacrifices that Derek would never have been willing to make. But the inheritance had been the seed money that started everything. "You never told us," Patricia whispered, her blue eyes filling with tears as the magnitude of her mistreatment became clear. "All these years we thought—" "You thought I was a failure," I said simply. "And maybe I let you think that because it was easier than dealing with the requests for money that would inevitably follow. Derek found out about my success 3 years ago when he needed help, and I've been quietly supporting him ever since." Derek's face crumpled as the last of his facade dissolved. The successful businessman image he'd cultivated was built entirely on property that belonged to his supposedly unsuccessful younger brother. The brother he'd ridiculed and dismissed at every family gathering. "Why?" Samantha asked, turning to stare at Derek with a mixture of hurt and betrayal. "Why would you lie to me about something so important?" But Derek had no answer. He sat there in his expensive suit, surrounded by the wreckage of his carefully constructed deception, while the truth spread across our table like spilled wine. Patricia's shock quickly transformed into something more familiar denial. She set her champagne flute down hard enough to make the crystals sing, her face flushing with indignation as she pointed an accusing finger at me. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she declared loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Wallace, I don't know what kind of desperate attention-seeking behavior this is, but it needs to stop immediately." My heart sank as I watched her retreat into the same willful blindness that had defined our family dynamics for decades. Even faced with documentary evidence, she couldn't accept that her narrative about her sons was completely wrong. "Mom, I just showed you the legal documents," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the hurt blooming in my chest. "The property ownership papers, the lease agreement, the bank statements, everything's right there. Documents can be forged." She snapped, her silver hair catching the light as she shook her head vehemently. "Anyone with a computer and some graphic design skills could create fake paperwork. This is exactly the kind of pathetic stunt you'd pull when you're jealous of Derek's legitimate success." Derek seized on his mother's lifeline like a drowning man grabbing driftwood. His color returned as he straightened in his chair, putting on the confident mask he wore so well. "That's exactly what this is," he said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Wallace has always resented my achievements. Now he's so desperate to compete that he's created an elaborate fantasy where he owns my property." Samantha looked back and forth between us, her confusion deepening. "But the lease has your signature on it, Derek. I saw it with my own eyes." "Digital signatures are easy to fake," Derek replied smoothly, falling back into his salesman persona. "Wallace probably copied my signature from a birthday card or something. He's got the technical skills to create convincing forgeries." I stared at my brother in amazement. Even caught red-handed, he was doubling down on his lies, manipulating the situation to make me look like the deceiver. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me that he was using my actual skills against me to discredit the truth. "This is insane," Jessica said, her voice tight with anger. "Wallace, call your property manager. Let them verify everything right now." "No," Patricia interrupted sharply. "We're not entertaining this delusion any further. Wallace, you need professional help if you genuinely believe these fantasies you've created." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly torn between supporting his wife and processing the evidence he'd seen. His weathered hands drummed against the table as he struggled with conflicting information. "Dad," I said, turning to appeal to what I hoped was his rational side. "You saw the documents, the bank statements, the property records, everything. You know I wouldn't forge legal documents just to win an argument." "Son," Robert said slowly, his voice heavy with uncertainty, "your mother has a point about how easy it is to manipulate documents these days. And Derek's explanation does make sense. You've always been creative, maybe too creative for your own good sometimes. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own father, faced with clear evidence of my success, chose to believe that I'd committed multiple felonies rather than accept that he'd been wrong about me for years. Besides, Derek continued, his confidence growing as he sensed victory. Even if these documents were real, which they're not, why would Wallace keep something like this secret? If he really owned all this property, wouldn't he have told us years ago? It was actually a fair question, and one that I'd wrestled with myself. Why had I hidden my success from my family? The answer was sitting right in front of me because I'd known they would never accept it. Maybe because every time I've ever accomplished anything, you've found a way to tear it down, I said quietly. Remember when I won that design competition in college? You convinced Mom and Dad it was just a participation trophy. When I got my first big freelance contract, you said it wouldn't last. I learned it was easier to just keep my mouth shut. Oh, please, Samantha scoffed, her earlier confusion replaced by contempt. Now you're playing the victim card. Wallace, this is pathetic even for you. Karen approached our table again, her professional smile strained as she sensed the growing tension. Is everything all right here? Can I get anyone another drink? Everything's fine, Patricia said curtly. My son is just going through a difficult period and acting out for attention. The server retreated quickly, but I noticed other diners watching our table with open curiosity. Our family drama was becoming public entertainment, which only added to my humiliation. You know what the sad part is, Derek said, leaning back in his chair with renewed smugness. Wallace probably believes his own lies at this point. He's created such an elaborate fantasy that he's lost touch with reality. Derek, Jessica said sharply, her green eyes flashing with fury. Stop talking about Wallace like he's not sitting right here, and stop pretending you don't know exactly what property he's referring to. I don't know what property he's referring to, Derek replied smoothly, because the property he's describing belongs to me. I own that penthouse free and clear. I have the deed and mortgage papers to prove it. Then show them, I challenged, pulling out my phone again. Call your bank right now and have them confirm your mortgage. Better yet, let's call the building management company and ask them who signs the rent checks every month. I don't need to prove anything to you, Derek shot back. Everyone at this table knows who the successful brother is, and it's not the one living in a studio apartment and making up stories about being a property mogul. 1 bedroom. I corrected automatically, though it seemed pointless now. And I don't live there anymore. I moved to a condo in Gold Coast 2 years ago. Patricia laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the restaurant noise. Of course you did. Let me guess, you own that one too. Maybe you own the whole building. The accuracy of her sarcastic guess was startling. I did, in fact, own the building where my condo was located. It was a small 8-unit building that I'd purchased and renovated, keeping the penthouse unit for myself while renting out the others. But sharing that information now would only make me look more delusional in their eyes. Mom, I said, my voice breaking slightly with emotion. Why is it so impossible for you to believe that I might be successful? Why is it easier to think I'm lying than to consider that you might have been wrong about me? Because I know you, Wallace, she replied, her blue eyes cold and certain. I'm your mother. I've watched you drift through life without direction or ambition. Derek has been building his empire while you've been playing video games and doodling. The casual dismissal of my work and achievements felt like being slapped. I thought about the late nights I'd spent learning property law, the weekends devoted to building inspections and tenant interviews. The careful financial planning that had allowed me to acquire property after property while my peers struggled with student loans and credit card debt. Fine, I said, pulling up my contact list. I'm calling Marcus Webb, the property manager for 1 Museum Park West. He can settle this right now. Wallace, stop. Robert said, his voice carrying paternal authority. You're embarrassing yourself and making Jessica uncomfortable. Just admit this was a misguided attempt to get attention, and let's move on. But I was already dialing the number, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and desperation. Marcus answered on the second ring, his familiar voice warm and professional. Wallace, good evening. How can I help you? Marcus, I'm having a family dinner, and there's some confusion about one of my properties, I said, putting the phone on speaker so everyone could hear. Can you please confirm that I'm the owner of Unit 3217 at 1 Museum Park West? Of course, Marcus replied without hesitation. You've been the owner since September of 2021. Is there a problem with the unit, sir? The table fell silent as Marcus's voice carried clearly through the restaurant air. Patricia's face went pale again while Derek looked like he might be sick. And who's the current tenant in that unit? I continued, watching Derek's expression grow more panicked with each word. Derek Andrews has been renting from you since October of that year, Marcus said. Though I should mention he's significantly behind on his rent payments. We've been sending notices, but I ended the call before Marcus could share more details about Derek's financial situation. The damage was done. An independent third party had just confirmed every word I'd said, leaving no room for claims about forged documents or elaborate fantasies. The silence stretched on until it became unbearable. Derek's face cycled through emotions like a traffic light, malfunctioning red with embarrassment, yellow with panic, then settling into a desperate shade of determination. Instead of admitting defeat, he chose to dig his hole even deeper. All right, fine, he said, his voice taking on a calculated quality that I recognized from his sales presentations. You caught me in a technicality. Yes, the property is technically in Wallace's name, but that's only because I gave him the money to buy it in the first place. My jaw dropped at the audacity of this new lie. Patricia's eyes lit up with hope, eager to grasp any explanation that would restore her preferred version of reality. Derek helped you buy the property, she asked, turning toward me with renewed suspicion. Why didn't you mention that important detail? Because it's not true, I said, but Derek was already building his new narrative with the skill of a master manipulator. 3 years ago, Wallace was completely broke. Derek continued, smoothly warming to his theme. His graphic design business was failing. He was about to be evicted from that tiny apartment, and he came to me begging for help. Samantha nodded slowly as if pieces were finally falling into place. That makes so much more sense. I remember you getting that big bonus around that time, Derek. Exactly, Derek said, shooting his wife a grateful look. I'd just closed the Henderson account, biggest commission of my career. Wallace was desperate, so I decided to help him out by giving him the down payment for the Penthouse. I watched in fascination as Derek wove his web of lies, incorporating just enough real details to make the story believable. There had been a Henderson account, and Derek had received a substantial commission. What he wasn't mentioning was that he'd lost most of that money in a poker game 2 days later. So, the property is in my name for tax reasons. Derek continued, pulling out his phone with newfound confidence. Wallace gets to claim ownership while I handle all the real financial responsibilities. It's actually a pretty smart arrangement. He started scrolling through his messages, stopping at what appeared to be a text conversation between us. Here, look at these messages from Wallace. He's always asking me for money, begging for more loans to keep the business afloat. Robert leaned over to examine Derek's screen, his expression brightening as he saw what looked like desperate pleas for financial help. Son, why didn't you just tell us the truth from the beginning? Because I'm proud, Derek said, perfectly mimicking the humble tone I should have used. I wanted people to think I'd made it on my own, not because my big brother bailed me out. The messages looked convincing, I had to admit. Derek had either become remarkably skilled at photo manipulation, or he'd actually taken the time to create fake text conversations. Either way, it was an impressive piece of deception. That's completely fabricated, I said, pulling out my own phone to show our real message history. Derek, show them the timestamps on those messages. Better yet, let them see your bank records from 3 years ago. I don't need to prove anything else, Derek replied confidently. The evidence speaks for itself. Everyone at this table knows I'm the successful brother, and now they know I'm generous enough to help family members who can't make it on their own. Jessica grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my sleeve with barely controlled fury. Wallace, this is insane. You have bank records showing the cash purchase. You have the original property deed with your name on it. How is everyone just ignoring reality? Because the reality is painful, I said quietly, finally understanding the depth of my family's commitment to their illusions. It's easier to believe Derek's lies than to admit they've been wrong about both of us for years. Nobody's been wrong about anything, Patricia said, her voice regaining its authority. Derek is successful and generous, just like I always said. Wallace is struggling and in need of help, just like I always said. The only difference is that now we know Derek has been quietly supporting his brother without asking for recognition. The twisted logic was breathtaking. Even when presented with overwhelming evidence of Derek's deception and my success, they found a way to maintain their original narrative by casting Derek as the secret hero and me as the charity case. Mom, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. I bought that property with my own money. I've never asked Derek for a loan in my life. In fact, I've been the one supporting him. Supporting him how? Derek challenged, sensing he was regaining control of the situation. By letting him help you invest his money, by taking credit for his generosity. That's when I made my mistake. Instead of producing more evidence or calling another witness, I let my anger get the better of me and revealed information I'd been trying to protect. By paying your gambling debts, I said the words tumbling out before I could stop them. By covering 6 months of back rent, by keeping you from getting evicted from the property you claim to own. The table went dead silent. Derek's confident expression cracked like thin ice, while Samantha slowly turned to stare at her husband with growing horror. Gambling debts, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's background noise. I immediately regretted my outburst, but there was no taking it back now. The secret I'd been keeping to protect Derek's marriage was out in the open, and the fallout was going to be devastating. That's a lie, Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. Wallace is getting desperate now, making up stories about gambling to deflect from his own problems. Is it a lie, Derek? Samantha asked, her voice gaining strength and edge. Because now that I think about it, there have been a lot of unexplained expenses lately. A lot of nights when you claimed to be working late but came home smelling like cigarettes and alcohol. Samantha, don't listen to him. Derek pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead again. He's just trying to cause problems in our marriage because he's jealous. But Samantha was connecting dots that had been scattered across years of suspicious behavior. Her face went through its own transformation as memories aligned with new information. The credit card bills you said were for business expenses. She continued, her voice getting louder. The phone calls you took in private. The money you borrowed from our joint account that you said was for investments. Those were legitimate business expenses, Derek insisted, but his foundation was crumbling rapidly. I pulled up my banking records again, this time showing the payments I'd made on Derek's behalf. $12,000 to Hard Rock Casino in March, $8,000 to Rivers Casino in July, $15,000 to some guy named Tony Marchetti who Derek said was going to break his legs if he didn't pay up. The mention of Tony Marchetti made Derek go completely white. Samantha gasped and covered her mouth with her hand, finally understanding the true scope of her husband's deception. You've been gambling, she said, the words coming out like an accusation and a realization simultaneously. All this time, while I thought we were building our future together, you've been gambling our money away. It's not that simple, Derek started, but Samantha held up her hand to stop him. And Wallace has been bailing you out, she continued, turning toward me with a mixture of gratitude and horror. That's why the property is in his name. That's why you've been lying about everything. You're not a success story, you're a cautionary tale. The truth was finally emerging, but it felt more like a Pyrrhic victory than vindication. I'd wanted my family to understand my success, not to destroy Derek's marriage in the process. Samantha, please, Derek begged, reaching for her hand. I can explain everything. It's not as bad as it sounds. But Samantha pulled away from him like he'd burned her. How bad is it, Derek? How much have you lost? How much does Wallace really own? Derek looked at me with pure desperation in his eyes, silently pleading for me to maintain the secret I'd just shattered. But it was too late for half-truths and protective lies. The whole ugly truth was about to come out. The weight of 3 years of secrets pressed down on me like a physical force as I looked around the table at my fractured family. Derek's pleading eyes begged me to stop, but Samantha deserved to know what she was dealing with. Jessica squeezed my hand encouragingly, while my parents sat in stunned silence, finally beginning to grasp the magnitude of what they'd missed. Derek owes me $53,000, I said quietly, the number hanging in the air like a death sentence. $27,000 in back rent and $26,000 that I've paid directly to casinos and loan sharks to keep him from getting hurt. Samantha's face went through a series of micro-expressions, shock, betrayal calculation, and finally a kind of numb resignation. $53,000, she repeated slowly. That's more than I make in a year. I opened my banking app and showed her the payment history, scrolling through months of transfers that told the story of Derek's downward spiral. March 15th, $8,000 to Harrah's Casino. April 22nd, $12,000 to a private creditor. May 8th, $6,000 to cover rent when Derek told me he was being evicted. Stop, Derek whispered, his hands shaking as he reached for his water glass. Please, Wallace, you're destroying everything. You destroyed everything, I replied, but without malice. I've just been trying to keep you alive and housed while you figure out how to stop. Patricia finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Derek, is this true? Have you really been gambling? Derek's composure finally cracked completely. His face crumpled like a demolished building, and he buried his head in his hands. It started small, he said, his voice muffled by his palms. Just friendly poker games with clients. Then I started winning, and it felt like easy money. When did the winning stop? Samantha asked, her voice clinical and detached. About 2 years ago, Derek admitted, but I kept thinking I could win it back. Just one big score to get, even, then I'd quit for good. I thought about all the late-night phone calls, Derek sobbing into the phone about how sorry he was and how he'd never gamble again. I thought about the promises he'd made and broken the lies he'd told to cover previous lies, the elaborate schemes he'd hatched to avoid facing consequences. Samantha, I said gently, there's more you need to know. Derek didn't just lose money gambling. He took out loans against credit cards you didn't know about. He borrowed money from dangerous people. 3 months ago, I had to pay Tony Marchetti $15,000 because Derek owed him money and Tony was making threats. Samantha's control finally broke. She started crying, not the delicate tears of a woman trying to preserve her makeup, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone whose world had just collapsed. How could you do this to us? She asked Derek through her tears. How could you risk our safety, our future, everything we built together? I thought I could fix it, Derek said desperately. I thought if I could just win back what I lost, everything would be okay. You'd never have to know. Robert cleared his throat, his weathered face etched with confusion and shame. Son, why didn't you come to us? We could have helped you get treatment, found you a counselor. Because I was ashamed, Derek replied, finally lifting his head to look at his father. Because I knew everyone would look at me the way you're looking at me now. But Wallace knew, Patricia said slowly, turning toward me. Wallace has known about this for 3 years and never said anything to us. I was trying to protect Derek, I explained, and protect Samantha from finding out her husband had a gambling addiction. I thought if I just helped him through the worst of it, he'd get clean on his own. Did you ever get clean? Jessica asked Derek directly, her voice gentle but firm. Derek shook his head miserably. I tried. I went to a few Gamblers Anonymous meetings, but I kept telling myself I wasn't that bad. I kept thinking I was different from the other people there. When was the last time you placed a bet? Samantha asked, her voice deadly quiet. The pause that followed was long enough to answer the question. Derek's silence stretched until it became its own confession. Last week, he finally whispered. I lost $2,000 on basketball games. I was going to tell you it was a business expense. Samantha closed her eyes and took a deep breath, composing herself with visible effort. When she opened them again, she looked directly at me instead of her husband. Wallace, you said Derek owes you money for rent. Does that mean he doesn't actually own the penthouse? He's never owned any property, I confirmed. The penthouse is just one of 12 properties I own. I bought it as an investment and offered to rent it to Derek at below market rate because he was family and he was in trouble. 12 properties, Robert repeated, as if testing the words. Wallace, what else haven't you told us? I pulled up my property portfolio on my phone and handed it to him. 2 apartment buildings, 6 condos, 3 single-family homes, and the penthouse. Total value around $14 million, generating $48,000 per month in rental income. The number seemed to physically stagger my father. He stared at the screen like it was written in a foreign language, scrolling through property after property that his supposedly unsuccessful son owned outright. $14 million, he repeated slowly. Wallace, how is this possible? Real estate investment, I said simply. I started with Grandma Helen's inheritance and reinvested every dollar of rental income into acquiring new properties. I've been doing this for 5 years. Patricia was crying now too, though her tears seemed different from Samantha's. Where Samantha was grieving the death of her illusions about her marriage, Patricia appeared to be mourning her relationship with me. All these years, she whispered, I've been calling you a failure while you were building an empire. I never needed you to call me a success, I said softly. I just needed you to stop calling me a failure. Karen approached our table again, this time with obvious concern. Folks, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're getting complaints about the noise level. Would you prefer a private dining room where you can talk more freely? That would be wonderful, Jessica said before anyone else could respond. Thank you. As we gathered our belongings to move to a quieter space, Derek grabbed my arm. Wallace, I'm sorry, he said, his eyes red with tears and shame. I'm so sorry for everything. The lying, the stealing, the way I let everyone treat you. I don't deserve your help, but I don't know what I'll do without it. You're going to get treatment, I said firmly. Real treatment, not just a few AA meetings, and you're going to be completely honest with Samantha about your finances. What if she leaves me? I looked at Samantha, who was walking ahead of us with Jessica, her shoulders squared with grim determination. Then you'll learn to live with the consequences of your choices. But maybe if you're really committed to getting better, she'll give you a chance to earn back her trust. And you, Derek asked, will you give me a chance? I thought about all the nights I'd lost sleep worrying about my brother, all the money I'd spent keeping him safe, all the family gatherings where I'd sat quietly while he took credit for success built on my support. I'll always be your brother Derek, I said. But I'm done enabling your addiction. From now on, if you want my help, you get it the right way. As we settled into the private dining room, I realized that everything was about to change. The truth was finally out, but that was just the beginning of the real work. The private dining room felt like a confessional booth, its warm wood paneling and soft lighting creating an intimate space for our family's reckoning. Derek sat slumped in his chair like a man who'd just lost everything, while Samantha maintained the rigid posture of someone trying not to fall apart completely. I need to know everything, Samantha said, her voice steady despite the tears still glistening on her cheeks. Every debt, every lie, every dollar you've lost or stolen. If we're going to have any chance of fixing this, I need the complete truth. Derek nodded miserably, pulling out his phone with trembling hands. I've been keeping track, he said quietly. Not because I wanted to face it, but because I kept thinking I'd find a way to pay it all back. He opened a notes app and turned the screen toward Samantha. The list of debts was longer than I'd even realized. Credit cards maxed out at $38,000, personal loans totaling $22,000, money borrowed from friends that he'd never mentioned, and the $53,000 he owed me. $137,000, Samantha read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek, that's more than we make combined in 2 years. I know, he said, his voice cracking. I know how bad it is. That's why I couldn't tell you. That's why I had to keep lying and gambling, hoping I could win enough to fix everything. Patricia looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Derek, sweetheart, when did this start? How did it get so bad without anyone noticing? It started about 4 years ago. Derek began his confession, pouring out like water through a broken dam. I was having trouble at work, not hitting my sales targets. A client invited me to a poker game, said it was good for networking. He described how the friendly games had evolved into serious gambling, how initial wins had convinced him he had a natural talent, how losses had driven him to chase bigger scores, to break even. The progression was textbook addiction behavior, but hearing it from Derek made it feel fresh and devastating. The worst part, Derek continued, was how good I got at lying. I convinced myself that the lies were temporary, that I'd tell the truth once I won everything back. But the lies just kept growing until they became my whole life. What about your job? Robert asked. Are you really a senior vice president? Derek shook his head. I'm a regular sales rep. I got a small promotion last year, but I exaggerated it to make my success story sound better. My actual salary is about $60,000 a year, not the $120,000 I told everyone. Each revelation hit like a separate blow. Samantha had been making financial decisions based on Derek's false income reports. Patricia had been bragging to her friends about Derek's non-existent executive position, and I'd been watching it all while trying to keep Derek's house of cards from collapsing. Wallace, Samantha said, turning toward me with something between gratitude and guilt in her eyes. You've been protecting us from the truth this whole time. Why? Because I love my brother, I said simply, and because I thought if I could just help him through the worst of it, he'd find his way back to being the person I grew up with. But he wasn't getting better, Jessica observed gently. The gambling continued. The lies continued. The debt kept growing. I nodded, finally acknowledging what I'd been avoiding for months. I was enabling him. Every time I bailed him out, I made it easier for him to avoid facing consequences. I thought I was being loving, but I was actually making the problem worse. You saved my life, Derek said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. Wallace, you literally saved my life. Tony Marchetti wasn't just threatening to hurt me. He was threatening to kill me. The admission sent a chill through the room. Patricia gasped and covered her mouth while Robert's face went pale with shock. 3 months ago, Derek continued, I owed Tony $15,000 and I didn't have it. He told me I had 48 hours to pay or he'd make me disappear. I called Wallace sobbing, begging him to help me one more time. I remembered that phone call vividly. Derek had been hysterical, barely coherent through his tears and panic. He'd been hiding in a hotel room, afraid to go home because Tony's associates had been watching his apartment. I paid Tony directly, I said. Met him at a coffee shop downtown and handed him $15,000 in cash. He told me that if Derek ever owed him money again, he wouldn't be so understanding. You never told me about the death threats, Patricia said, staring at Derek with horrified fascination. Because I knew you'd try to get involved, Derek replied. And these aren't people you can negotiate with or reason with. They only understand money and fear. Samantha was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of danger her husband had brought into their lives. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, harder. Derek, I need you to understand something, she said. I can forgive the gambling. I can forgive the debt. I can even forgive the lies as painful as they are. But I cannot forgive putting my life in danger without my knowledge." "Samantha, please," Derek began, but she held up her hand to stop him. "I'm not done," she continued. "If we're going to try to save our marriage, you're going into treatment immediately. Not next week, not next month, tomorrow. And you're going to surrender control of all our finances to me until you can prove you're trustworthy again." Derek nodded eagerly, desperate to accept any terms that might preserve his marriage. "Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need." "And you're going to get a second job," Samantha added. "We're going to pay back every dollar you owe, starting with the money you owe Wallace." "Actually," I interrupted, "I want to make something clear. Derek, you don't owe me $53,000. Everyone at the table stared at me in confusion. Derek's face showed a mixture of hope and suspicion. "You owe me $27,000 for back rent," I continued. "The other $26,000 I paid to casinos and loan sharks was a gift. I never expected to get that money back, and I don't want you destroying yourself trying to repay money I spent to keep you alive." Derek started crying again, but these were different tears, relief mixed with shame and gratitude. "Why?" he asked through his sobs. "After everything I've done to you, why are you still helping me?" "Because you're my brother," I said. "And because I finally understand that enabling your addiction isn't love. Real love means helping you face consequences and get better, not protecting you from the results of your choices." Patricia had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now she spoke up with a voice full of remorse. "Wallace, I owe you an enormous apology. I've spent years dismissing you as a failure while you were secretly holding our family together." "Mom, you don't need to apologize," I began, but she shook her head firmly. "Yes, I do. I was so invested in the story I'd created about my sons that I refused to see who you really are. I turned you into a disappointment because it made Derek's mediocrity look like success by comparison." Her insight was painfully accurate. I'd often suspected that my mother needed me to fail in order to make Derek's modest achievements seem impressive. "I'm proud of you," Robert said suddenly, his voice gruff with emotion. "Son, I'm proud of the man you've become, the business you've built, and the way you've taken care of your brother even when it cost you. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." The validation I'd craved for decades was finally mine, but it felt different than I'd imagined. There was satisfaction, but also sadness for all the years we'd wasted living in illusion. "There's something else," Derek said, wiping his eyes with his napkin. "Wallace, you've been supporting me for 3 years, but you've never asked for anything in return. Never made me feel guilty or held it over my head. That kind of generosity, especially to someone who's been treating you badly, that's something I'll never be able to repay." "You can repay it by getting better," I said. "By being honest with your wife, with yourself, and with everyone else. By becoming the brother I remember from when we were kids." "Before the competition started," Derek said with a sad smile. "Before Mom and Dad started comparing us and making everything a contest." Patricia winced at the implied criticism, but she didn't deny it. "I think I wanted you boys to push each other to be better," she said. "But somewhere along the way it became about winning and losing instead of growing and supporting each other." "We can change that," Jessica said, speaking for the first time in several minutes. "It's not too late to build a healthier family dynamic." As if to prove her point, Derek stood up from his chair and walked around the table to where I was sitting. Without saying anything, he wrapped his arms around me in a hug that felt like the first genuine affection he'd shown me in years. "I love you, brother," he whispered in my ear. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve your faith in me." For the first time in 3 years, I believed he might actually mean it. 6 months later, I sat in the same private dining room at Morrison's Steakhouse, but everything had changed. Derek arrived first, this time looking healthier than I'd seen him in years. His face had lost the gray pallor of constant stress, and his eyes were clear and focused in a way that reminded me of the brother I'd grown up with. 97 days clean," he announced as he took his seat, showing me the app on his phone that tracked his gambling-free streak. 117 days since I attended my first real therapy session. Samantha arrived next, holding Derek's hand in a gesture that spoke volumes about the state of their marriage. They'd spent months in counseling, working through layers of betrayal and broken trust, but they'd chosen to rebuild rather than walk away. "The therapist says I have trust issues," Samantha said with a wry smile. "But apparently that's normal when your husband lies to you for 3 years about being a gambling addict. How's the second job going?" I asked Derek, who'd taken a position at a local hardware store to supplement his sales income and speed up debt repayment. "It's humbling," Derek replied honestly. "But good humbling, if that makes sense. I'm learning what it feels like to work for money instead of trying to win it." Patricia and Robert arrived together, their relationship with me transformed in ways that were both wonderful and bittersweet. Patricia hugged me warmly, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a year ago, while Robert clapped me on the shoulder with genuine pride. "How's business?" Robert asked, and I could hear that he actually wanted to know, not just making polite conversation. "I just closed on property number 15, I said. "A small apartment complex in Andersonville. The rental income should push my monthly revenue over $55,000. 15 properties, Patricia repeated, shaking her head in amazement. "I still can't believe I called you a failure while you were building a real estate empire." Jessica squeezed my hand under the table, her engagement ring catching the light from the chandelier above us. We'd gotten engaged 3 months ago after she'd seen how I handled the family crisis and decided she wanted to spend her life with someone who chose love over ego. "Actually," I said, "I have an announcement to make. Derek, you know how you've been asking about buying a property of your own once you get your finances straightened out." Derek nodded eagerly. He'd been working with a financial counselor to create a 5-year plan for rebuilding his credit and establishing legitimate wealth. "I want to sell you the Penthouse," I continued. "At cost with owner financing at 0% interest. Your monthly payments will be exactly what you've been paying in rent." Derek's mouth dropped open in shock. "Wallace, I can't accept that. It's too generous." "It's not a gift," I explained. "It's an investment in your recovery. Owning property will give you something real to protect a reason to stay clean that goes beyond just avoiding consequences." "But why?" Samantha asked. "You could sell that property for twice what you paid and put the money into something more profitable." "Because my brother needs to own something," I said simply. "He needs to experience legitimate success, the kind that comes from work and commitment instead of luck and deception." Derek started crying, but these were tears of joy rather than shame. "I don't deserve this," he said. "No, you don't." I agreed, which made everyone laugh despite the emotional moment. "But I'm not giving it to you because you deserve it. I'm giving it to you because I love you and I believe you can earn it." "There's a condition," I added, which made Derek's expression grow serious. "You have to complete 1 full year of gambling addiction treatment. Weekly therapy sessions, group meetings, the whole program. Miss a session without a medical excuse and the deal's off." "Deal," Derek said immediately, extending his hand across the table. "Thank you, Wallace. Thank you for never giving up on me." As we shook hands, I noticed Patricia watching us with tears in her eyes. "I'm seeing my sons together for the first time in years," she said. "Really together, not just in the same room competing with each other." The evening continued with genuine conversation instead of performance. Derek shared stories from his therapy sessions, talking openly about the work he was doing to understand why he'd turned to gambling in the first place. Samantha described her own counseling journey, learning to trust her instincts again after years of accepting lies. "The hardest part," Derek said, "wasn't admitting I had a gambling problem. It was admitting that I'd been jealous of Wallace our whole lives." "Jealous of me?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "But you were always Mom and Dad's favorite." "That's exactly why I was jealous," Derek replied. "You never had to worry about living up to expectations because nobody expected much from you. I was so busy trying to be the perfect son that I never learned who I actually was." The insight was startling and sad. All those years I'd envied Derek's favored status while he'd envied my freedom to fail without disappointing anyone. I turned to gambling because it was the only place where I could succeed without Mom and Dad watching and judging. Derek continued. When I won, it felt like an accomplishment that was purely mine. And when you lost? Jessica asked gently. When I lost, it felt like proof that I was the failure I'd always been afraid of becoming. We talked for hours, sharing stories and insights that had been buried under years of competition and resentment. By the end of the evening, we felt like a family, instead of a collection of people related by biology. As we prepared to leave, Derek pulled me aside one final time. Wallace, I need you to know something. Even before tonight, even when I was lying and stealing and treating you terribly, I always knew you were the better man. Derek, that's not true. It is true, he insisted. You built something real while I was chasing fantasies. You helped people while I was hurting people. You chose character while I chose image. I may be older, but you've always been the big brother in every way that matters. 6 months earlier, hearing Derek acknowledge my success would have felt like victory. Now it just felt like the beginning of something better, a relationship based on truth instead of competition. As Jessica and I drove home through the Chicago streets, I reflected on how much my life had changed. I still owned 14 properties and would soon own 15. My business was thriving and my bank account was healthy, but the real transformation had nothing to do with money or success. I'd learned that protecting someone from consequences isn't love. It's enabling. I'd learned that family approval isn't worth sacrificing your truth. Most importantly, I'd learned that real success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by how you use what you have to lift up the people around you. Derek still had a long journey ahead of him. Addiction recovery isn't a destination, it's a daily choice. But for the first time in years, I believed he was choosing healing over hiding growth, over gambling, truth over illusion. What are you thinking about? Jessica asked as we stopped at a red light. I'm thinking about how different tonight was from 6 months ago, I said. How much courage it takes to choose honesty when lies have been working for you. Are you proud of Derek? I considered the question carefully. I'm proud of the man he's becoming. I'm proud of the work he's doing. But mostly I'm grateful that we found our way back to being brothers instead of competitors. The light turned green, and we drove toward our future together. Behind us, Derek and Samantha were probably having their own conversation about healing and hope. My parents were likely processing the evening's insights about favoritism and family dynamics. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like we were all moving in the same direction, toward truth, toward health, toward the kind of family relationships that nurture rather than wound. The lesson I'd learned was simple but profound. True success isn't about proving you're better than someone else. It's about using your strength to help others become their best selves. It's about choosing love over ego, truth over image, and family over winning. Sometimes the greatest victory is helping someone else find their way back to who they're meant to be. What would you do if you discovered a family member was struggling with addiction, but too proud to ask for help? Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone's secrets and exposing the truth for their own good? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family forgiveness and finding your way through difficult situations. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear about the power of choosing love over judgment. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that it's never too late to rebuild relationships based on honesty and compassion. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who need our help the most. Until next time, remember that family isn't about being perfect, it's about being real.